University in '52. Korea was going on, and we had a national draft in effect. And young men who were healthy and going to college were given line numbers out of high school or shortly thereafter, and then we were deferred until completion of college. But when baccalaureate school was over, we were all getting called. As it turned out, I had my line number coming up like late August of 1952 to report to the train station to go in the Army. And in the meantime, shortly after school, while I was still in New York, as a matter of fact, my home's in York, Pennsylvania. While I was still in New York, I heard somehow, I don't even know how that happened, that the Air Force was taking male physical therapists into the Women's Medical Specialist Corps. Okay, so I heard that was happening, and the Congress had to pass special enabling legislation to let men come into the WMSC because we were at that time patterned exactly after the Army Medical Department, and they had Women's Medical Specialist Corps for PTOT and dietitians. And the Air Force couldn't recruit enough volunteer women to do the PT job, and of course with combat going on, there was a whole peck of traumatic injuries and illness from being in the trenches or in Korea and that kind of stuff.
Right.
So I applied for a commission in the Air Force. They granted 10 commissions to 10 guys to come into the Women's Medical Specialist Corps. And by the grace of God, I was one of them. That happened in May. I graduated in May. I got my commission shortly thereafter. Took a battery of exams and that kind of stuff. I got my commission shortly thereafter, and then the issue was to get called to duty because whichever service would have given me an induction a little before the other, I would have had to comply. As it turned out, I was able to go on active duty in the Air Force about the 21st or 22nd of August in '52, and I had my Army line number to show up like the 23rd or 24th at the train station in York, Pennsylvania. It was really looking tough. As a matter of fact, I made a trip down to Washington, which was only about 90 miles from our home, and I said, I sure hope I can get this over and done with, because I really want to do PT.
Right.
And so it happened, and I came on active duty. I went, like all medical service officers, women medical specialists included, down to Gunner for an orientation program, and then over to Maxwell, which had a sizable hospital at that time, and an orthopedic service, and I learned how the Air Force put PT together in the medical service construct. And then my first assignment was at Randolph, where the missions for Lackland in '52 and '53 had been spread across the Air Force because there was a big construction program going on. Not the one with the current tower, but the one prior to that when they were moving out of cantonment buildings into the main building. And Randolph was running 125 beds at that time. We had two thoracic surgeons there. They had the thoracic surgery mission. One of them was Hank Swindell, a name that you may know, who ended up being a BG in the Medical Corps of the Air Force. And so I worked with him, and I was doing PT. My boss was Freddie Hart, who was one of the, I think, 30 or 40 or so Army MSCs that had agreed to transfer over to the Air Force to help get the Air Force Medical Service Corps started. Grand guy. Blustery outside, heart of gold, and he was really my first adult mentor that I could remember in any kind of work. I had one in college too, but in any kind of work. Fred thought I would be a hospital administrator even, and he kept giving me administrative duties, which I resented something awful. I wanted nothing to do with that. But he saw wisdom that I didn't yet have, and after about 2 years, we went on for a 3-year hitch. But after about 18 months, each of the 10 of us got letters from the Surgeon General saying that we could leave at the end of 2 years instead of staying for 3, or switch career fields and stay in, but we could not stay on active duty and do physical therapy. How them apples, huh? Oh. So Fred, who had been pushing administration, had me said, see, I told you so. So I switched for that last year, and that chance to go to England with my wife, and that started me down the track of the Medical Service Corps. But I began officially in the Women's Medical Specialist Corps. I didn't go to a program like HSA. I did go to the basic orientation thing where they tell you how to wear your hat and put your insignia on your uniform and that kind of stuff. But I never went to an HSA class. So that's what started it, and the rest was on the documents of what I had done. So I would tell you, I called on that clinical experience over and over and over again. And I truly believe it not only made me more broad in my perspective, but gave me a greater sensitivity for what we're all about in the medical service. There's a very sobering aspect to taking care of patients and dealing with their families on clinical issues as opposed to the administrative stuff. So it was just uniquely beneficial for me, and I enjoyed it a great deal. Well, my bias in or out of the Air Force for people going in hospital administration is if they have a business degree as a baccalaureate degree and they want to go to a master's degree, I'd suggest that they look at hospital admin programs that are housed in schools of medicine or clinical site like that. Conversely, if they started as physical therapist or nursing or anything like that, my recommendation would be that they look for a master's in healthcare and a school of business. Because I think those perspectives come together beautifully. They are different bodies of academic preparation, and I think you benefit by being exposed to both. Insofar as getting past the education into the workforce, I've always been a believer in getting as broad an experience as possible as early as possible. And if you're strong in one area, to seek out areas where you're not strong, and to gain benefit of some experience in that given field. That's routinely my counsel to folks starting in healthcare. And having now 35 years after 30 years in the Air Force, being over in the civilian sector, I've had occasion to work with a lot of students. The Air Force does a much better job by broadening officers early with a lot of different opportunity as opposed to what happens in the civilian sector. But either way, I think it's important to get that broad exposure and in the first 3-4 years. Well, let me go to lessons. There's one that I remember vividly from about 1953 or 4, shortly after I came on active duty. We had a salty old adjutant, a first lieutenant, I think he was. Latier was the name. he had been a non-com for many, many years and got commissioned in the Medical Service Corps. And one day, we had a big deal of skeet shooting at Randolph. The guys on flying status were all issued 500 rounds of ammunition a month to go skeet shooting or trap shooting. The notion being to improve hand-eye coordination and facilitate reaction and that kind of thing. Well, that ammunition was used in part, but they always had a lot left, and we had competition among squadrons on the base in skeet shooting. I had never done that. I adopted it. I loved it. And one morning, that's all prologue, to say I didn't have anything that I had to do in my office. And I decided to go skeet shooting. And at that time, you could get down. It was always manned at Randolph. Get a weapon, get the shells, and go out and fire 2, 3, 4 rounds, whatever. And I finally got back to the hospital like about 10 or 10:30 in the morning. And the adjutant had left a message at my desk saying, "Wagner, come see me." I thought, oh shit. So I went out, and he went up one side of me and down the other for not having been at my workplace. But the lesson was this: if you don't want to or cannot be here, that is perfectly fine. But don't you ever again decide you're not going to show up or not let anybody know. Boy, that stuck with me to this day. I can hear him going after me on that basis. And in one of my early civilian jobs at a 600-bedder where I was the CEO, on my first day at work, I came in there and only one of the associates were in their office. This was like 8 o'clock in the morning. After a bit, 8:30 came, 8:45, 9 o'clock came, and they started showing up. And I can remember this like it were happening now. I called them in the office and I said, "Am I correct that our duty hours begin at 8 o'clock here?" They said, "Yes, that's right." I said, "Well, where were you?" And they said, "Well, we come in based on the work that we have." Sound familiar, huh? Based on the work that we have, and so as long as we get here to do our work, it's not really important whether we're here at 8 o'clock or not. I said, "Let me tell you something right off the bat. It might not be important to you, but it's important to me. And if you don't want to be here, have you heard that before? If you don't want to be here or can't be here, that's perfectly fine. But don't you ever again choose not to show up here just because you want to go do something." And they never did. And I could hear a tear talking to me as I was talking to them. That was 40 years earlier. Gosh. So that would be a lesson learned. Setbacks? Not really. I was very fortunate. I had superb bosses. Superb bosses, wonderful colleagues, great places to work. I didn't have any setback that was problematic. As far as a barrier, as an MSc, in my early days, particularly after graduate school, I was always troubled that we could never do what we could do in civilian life. That is to be the CEO or have a leadership role. I view that as a barrier involved to myself. If I ever had the possibility to do something about that, I was gone. And eventually that turned out. When I was at Wilford Hall and Paul Myers was my boss, you know that name? He became Surgeon General. Okay, Paul Myers was my boss. He used to talk to me about the preparation for MSCs being administrators and doctors being prepared for doctoring. And he shared my opinion that the MSCs ought to be doing that. I kept that at the forefront of my mind, and when he became Surgeon General, and Ken Peters, my predecessor, MSC Corps, became the Corps Chief, we started getting opportunities. I'm confident Myers had a hand in doing that, in small clinics to become the commander. Exactly the thing we've been prepared for. And Ken got that program going, bless his heart, and I was able to, in following him, keep that going and expand it. So there was a barrier that turned out to be okay. But I viewed that as a major thing. I had bosses, Nathan, for whom I had enormous respect. Guys like Bill Bynes and Bill Johnson and Ed Rogowski, guys that were very, very talented, very, very alert, well-educated, superb leadership qualities, and they just hit their head on that ceiling that belonged to the docs. That was always very, very difficult. That, of course, has changed dramatically now. Well, I'll answer that and the one next to it. What different skills were required? I don't think there were different leadership skills. I would count integrity and forthrightness among the major skill or attribute for a leader. And I found that to be every bit as important as a junior officer as I did as a senior officer. I never ever intentionally lied to anybody or try to soft-soap anything and make it sound good. If it was bad, it was bad, and if it was good, we reveled in it. But I never made any false promises at all. In terms of an additional one, not different necessarily, but additional, as you move up the seniority chain, particularly into Washington, the prominence of respecting all corps and all levels of command, SGO, major command, base command, the whole shooting match, became more and more important. Not that it wasn't before, but it was driven because you were now working across corps and across the line instead of just focusing on your job in a hospital or something like that. So just to summarize, I'd say integrity and forthrightness throughout, and then learning both to respect and work with and appreciate the attributes and skill sets and academic backgrounds that everybody brings. As a junior officer, I felt that way about the non-coms. I always loved the non-coms because they pick you up and dust off your knees as you scraped and that kind of stuff. I had great guys to work with, and we had good, wholesome friendships, and I always respected that. When I got to be a senior officer, the fellowship and the respect had to cut across line officers in planning and operations and facilities and supply and construction, the whole shooting match, and that was a little bit different. Non-commissioned officers were very, very important to me. I worked with them very closely. We spent lots of time together in learning what has to happen. I'm recalling a conversation that, like Mathieu's admonition of me, comes to mind. When I came to Randolph, which was my first military assignment in the Air Force, I worked with a non-com, Johnson was his last name, just a wonderful, wonderful guy. And after 3 years there, I was getting reassigned to England over to South Ruislip, and I was talking with him at the time of departure. I said, I just feel woefully unprepared for going out to this job that I'm gonna get. I'm really concerned about doing that. I want to be sure I don't fail. And there's just so much to know. And he said to me, Lieutenant Wagner, let me tell you something. There'll be other non-coms just like me there waiting to help you. And I never got over that. It was so true. And I did find that. Throughout that base and every other base. If you just listen to them and work with them and respect what they brought to the table, you do a lot better. Focusing on the people with whom I worked, as you well know, in the military service as a person civilian life, you don't have the benefit of saying, well, I like Mary Jones at my last hospital, I want to bring her here, and I like Joe Brown, I want to bring him here. You don't do that. You play the cards that you're given. And so a philosophy that said to me, everybody wants to be successful, recognizing that's not totally true, but as a basic statement, folks don't go to work to fail. They want to succeed, and their aspirations for workplace and family are the same that I had. They wanted to be successful, and so I focused on building those relationships, and acknowledging first, finding out, and then acknowledging what their aspirations were, and doing what I could to be of help, either academically or assignment-wise or something like that. Recognizing that if they were content in what they did, they would be serving the organization better than if they were restless or something like that. So you suggest in the question, people or mentorship, yes, they go together, and I consider that to be the most important philosophy, and it did evolve over tenure because I gained a greater and greater appreciation both for the necessity of that and for the value of focusing on the folks with whom you work. Well, I was always impressed by jointly setting goals and sharing visions for what had to be done. And I was always very diligent, I think at least, in getting agreed goals written down. And I hold on to those things, and when it would come evaluation time, we would go through that and sort of catalog what had been done, what hadn't been done, what could have been done better, what great progress had been made, what appropriate, do kind of a gap analysis on that, and then decide what the evaluation ought to be. I've always felt that telling somebody or having them think they've done a good job when they haven't is a grave disservice. Because again, most people want to do well, and I certainly, for one, want to know if I'm not pleasing my boss or meeting standards, and I always hope that those with whom I work would feel the same. So here again, integrity of the conversation and forthrightness and commentary sort of bleed through because I think they are so foundational. So we would go at it on that basis when they didn't meet expectations. And both for deficits and for positives, we talk about developmental goals, what could be done either to correct or to still improve further, and then all sort of got wrapped around together with the evaluative process. The open door policy phrase is so trite anymore. It sort of gets overused as a phrase, but as I suggested about non-coms from my earliest days, particularly coming from the clinical field into the administrative field days, and that was an enormous step. My background wasn't in business development, nor organizational design, or that kind of stuff. that wasn't what I had been taught. So I had to rely greatly on administrative guidance and managerial process, on the non-coms and my fellow officers and that kind of stuff. That created a mindset for me to be very diverse in seeking counsel and in allowing commentary. I tried never ever to react to ideas that I didn't agree with while somebody was talking, or I tried very hard never to say, here's the issue we have, and this is what I think ought to be done about it. What do you think ought to be done about it? I turn that around and say, here's the issue we have. If you were doing it, what do you think you would do? And then I try to get a variety of opinions so that we could really go at it, not necessarily in the traditional way, but in the way that jointly we would feel as a group or between two individuals might be the best approach. So I'd like to believe we did that fairly well. Obviously, there would have been errors I would have made unwittingly in that area, but I'm very much in favor of that. Even in civilian life, you find that a lot more than in the military. In civilian life, we don't have differentiation by grade, but we sure do by stature and title in civilian hospitals. And people are shy about talking. In every civilian hospital I've been in, it was a rare day that I wasn't throughout that hospital. Maybe not every place, but certainly several places. We had a lot of open staff meetings and stand-up, and I made it a practice to go see a minimum of 5 outpatients and 5 inpatients every day. I wouldn't spend more than a minute or two with them, simply introducing myself and saying, are things going okay, or what can we improve? I learned a great deal from that. And I learned a great deal from talking with the various specialty of physicians and people in the nursing units and in the support areas. That diversity of thinking really is very educational, not to mention totally productive. So I tried to do that. Well, it was imperative. We have far too many administrators that administer by sitting in their office and using email. In the old days, we used notes or telephone calls. But boy, oh boy, you don't get a clear perspective if you don't understand who you're dealing with and what the issues are they're facing. I made it a practice, Nathan, when I'd go to a new facility, particularly before I would be identified all that much, to go to very many of the waiting areas, and I'd just get a book and sit back in the corner of a magazine like I was a patient or a family member, and just sit and listen and watch. Daggone, that was educational. Just there. And see how people were being greeted and what they were being asked to do. It was just a fun educational experience for me. Well, I hope to leave it better than I had found it. I hope to remove the barriers, among which was the one I spoke about earlier. I always felt it was important to stay engaged. Some of my colleagues chose not to do that, and I respect that decision. But I've tried over the years to stay abreast of what's going on in the Air Force. I think an example of that would be like my having come to your HSA class. I left active duty in '82. We were still up at Shepherd at the time. Okay, it did my practice unless I had some overwhelmingly important thing to do as Corps Chief. I got to every graduating class of Medical Service Corps officers up at Shepherd. When I left active duty, beginning in '82, I was invited back. And I could count on one hand the number of classes that I missed between 1982 and November or October of 2016. When they were going on at Shepherd, I got up there. When they're here at Fort Sam, I got there. And Lord willing, as long as I'm invited, I'm going to try to do that, because I think there are things that have gone on in the past that people need to know about in our Corps, so they can carry on the story and the traditions, wholesome traditions, not traditionalism, but traditions, and do something about that and build on it. I think they need to have an understanding and respect for how we got started and how much these guys that moved over from the Army to help us get going, what a part they played, and how the field has changed. Just a side comment, I was invited to Keesler by, what was a general officer, Italian surname. I don't mean that, Hispanic surname. The Keesler was one of the first medical centers that the objective medical group design was put in. I was invited to come and make an evaluation of that. Speaking in summary, I thought it was terrible, because it was just too layered and splintered and breaking up the kind of cohesiveness that goes on among the nurses and the docs and the MSCs, and having leadership for each. I never did like that system, and I don't today. But anyhow, the idea there was that whether they liked it or not, that's what the Air Force was doing, and we had to accommodate to make it work. And I think that degree of flexibility is necessary. The very construct of the Air Force Medical Service is so different from when I came in. I mean, when I was on active duty, beginning, let's see, maybe, I guess when I left in 82, that'd be the best marker. We had over 100 bedded facilities around the world. And we had major medical centers, Keesler, Travis, Wright Pat, Andrews, Scott were all running 300 beds plus. Wilford Hall, when I was the administrator there, we had 1,200 beds, 1,000 in the house, and 100 across base, and 100 in the casualty staging unit. And boy, that's all gone away. Not to mention the overall end strength of the Corps, which has gone from 770,000 down to about 330,000. So it's just a dramatic Air Force. A dramatic change in the Air Force. I always tell the MSC classes while I'm there that I'm not qualified to counsel them on the Air Force today. I can talk about healthcare and I can talk about the Corps, but the differences are just remarkable. So I think trying to summarize all that, building in the flexibility and responding to the need and the mission is the important thing to do. Well, I really enjoy it, and for personal reasons, it's important to me to stay attached and have some understanding of what's going on. That's really important. I'm going to be 87 next year, not long after the year begins, and I don't know how much longer I can do this. Right now, thank God, I'm in good health. I'll stay at it as long as I'm able physically, because I certainly am interested mentally. Well, I've pretty much shot my wad on this, but I don't think I mentioned continuing education. I think that's important in any field, but in healthcare particularly, it is such a very, very, very dynamic industry. And I think it's important to stay attuned both to the clinical advances coming out of research and in pharmaceuticals, not in detail, but understanding that you don't use aspirin for everything anymore, or nose drops, just so many things happening. The imaging field, the method of care delivery switching to outpatient basis, the reimbursement systems, which are not important in the Air Force necessarily, but they certainly are to the industry, and they impact what goes on. Constant focus on how to do things better, which can grow only out of understanding what's going on and accommodating to that and trying to develop new processes so we can deal with it. I think that's a very, very important aspect. Given today, I'm going to say something like a heretic to you. Given the pressures of national economy today, I think we're long since past the place of greater consolidation of the armed forces in regard to health care, even with the VA and with the public health service. It makes little sense to me for a guy in uniform not to be able to go into a VA hospital if they have capacity, or for a VA patient to go into a military hospital if they have capacity, and that we view all these things as a federal healthcare system and provide the care at the place you can best get it and it's most convenient. I don't think this happens much anymore with the drawdown in the number of beds, but there were times when in San Antonio particularly where I spent more than my share of time. We loved it all, but I never asked one time to go there. I had 6 assignments in San Antonio. And we're from Pennsylvania, so you can imagine what that meant to my family. But anyhow, there were times when we had empty beds and Army guys would come in, we'd send them across town, and vice versa. I mean, it makes no sense. I remember my first tour of Wilford Hall, 60 to 62. I was in a job that if we had an Army guy come in, let's say an emergency or standing by airvac, they had to send a special report to the Department of the Army, and they had to reimburse the Air Force for the care of Joe Jones. Stupid. Same thing with VA. Those kinds of things are just bureaucratic mishmash. They make no sense at all, either economically or clinically. Sure. So I'm in favor of calling out those things that must be distinctive, like on-the-ground battlefield care, as opposed to behind-the-lines Air Force pilot care. I mean, there are some areas where there have to be distinctions. But anatomy and health care of all types remain the same regardless of where you got your injury. And I think we need to be more open and flexible and accommodating to utilizing the entire federal structure for any kind of a federal beneficiary. Definitely the correct direction. I'll tell you a little anecdote. I wish so many times I had saved this memo. But when I was a staffer in the Surgeon General's office between 62 and 66, a congressman, as best I recall, sent a message to the Air Force Surgeon General saying that we ought to consider having a combined medical service between the Army, Navy, and Air Force. I was in the consultants division with General Don Wagner, and that was sent to us for commentary and staffing, and Wenger gave it to me to staff. And there was a note on it from the Surgeon General. Mind you now, I'm going to write a position for the Air Force Surgeon General back to the congressman to give the answer. That's the way it works when you're a staff. You soon learn that what is the Surgeon General's policy is some guy by the name of Wagner or Reynolds that wrote it the way it ought to be, and the Surgeon General signed off on it. The Surgeon General didn't do any work on that. But anyhow, here comes this proposal, and Wagner's the staffer, and there was a note on there from the Surgeon General said, Wagner, staff this paper, the answer is no, make up the rationale. I wish I had kept it. That was about 64, 65 that I did that. Isn't it though? And I remember when I was up at Shepherd Nathan, this was from 72 continued only for 15 months into 74. I was summoned down to Wilford Hall by Paul Myers. But then somebody had the crazy idea that we ought to combine some training. That maybe the Army, Navy, and Air Force could teach the same anatomy. Or we ought to make spectacles in the Air Force the same as we did in the Army. We had different fabrication centers, and I was assigned to go out to Fitzsimmons in Denver and take a look at their spectacle fabrication shop and make a report on what would be the problems with making spectacles for all armed forces at one or two places instead of each service having their own. Imagine.
How about that?
Same thing with some inter-service training, like biomedical equipment repair. We had a prestigious BMED program up at Shepherd, and it was they were enviable graduates. Boy, those young people could go and do anything virtually anywhere. And we had our own program, the Army had theirs, and somebody had the crazy idea that maybe you fix medical equipment the same in the Army hospital as you do in the Air Force. Imagine. What a heresy. And I was asked to evaluate that also. I've been a promoter and believer in combination in areas where we can legitimately combine for years and years and years. I never did see the reason to do some of that separately, but it was just, the more separate you are, the more superstructure you need, and the more positions there are, duplicate or not, among the services. And I think we can do a much better job. As a matter of fact, financially, we have to do a better job. Let's drive everything to the ground in this country. Well, while I was working with Wagner, I talked about staffing the paper on Department of Defense consolidation. One of the other things I worked there was reimbursement for and acknowledgement of getting certified in the college as a fellow. I viewed that as being tantamount to getting your certification in a medical specialty. I was in the consultants division where that was a very, very important thing. And son of a gun, I was able to get a amendment through for the regulation that would acknowledge MSCs in the same way as physicians got acknowledged for board certification. We were able to get that for MSCs when they went to fellowship in the college. And I count that as one of the things that was most satisfying for me. Very, very rewarding that we could make that happen. But even though, again, in talking about the barriers early on, I had to look through the medical corps general officers. Good heavens, it was a battle, but we got the job done.